There are some key turning points in mid-career and midlife. So how do we best manage these turning points, especially if we aim to make our second half of life even better than our first? Well, this is a hot topic right now, not for only for entrepreneurial businesses, but for our entire population. Well, today's interview is with Dr. Charlene Ruan, a clinical psychologist and founder of a large group practice. And she's an expert in mediation and mindfulness-based treatments. Transitions in the halftime of life, they affect both men and women. And we uncover some of the myths and the facts as we all enter this second half of life to have the healthiest relationships possible with adult kids, partners, parents, and friends. So stay tuned. This podcast is brought to you by DJ Works Media with resources and ideas for you at mid-career or halftime of life. Check out our online courses where we want you to not only start, but finish. Books available in all versions, and songs available for immediate download with sheet music and instrumental accompaniment tracks. Our musicals are family-friendly with great music that's memorable and inspiring. Sign up at goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter for weekly updates. Now to our episode. Well, hello, everyone. So excited to have Dr. Charlene Ruan. Hopefully I've gotten your name completely right.
You did.
I can mispronounce almost anything. But we are really approaching such a hot topic today. Very, very relevant for those at mid-career, halftime. There's so much information out. I mean, you can just turn around everywhere, but it's got memes. They've got all of this. And I kind of want to be able to set the record straight from a clinical psychologist today and from your expertise. And I like my guests, which I'm so thankful for so much interest, but to be able to introduce their background. So can you introduce or kind of introduce our audience to your background and why you're doing what you're doing?
Oh yes, thank you, and I'm glad to be here. And it's a very important topic, so glad to connect and talk about it. So like you said, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I also own a group practice that I started maybe 6 years ago at this point, and Thrive, and I focus on women's mental health and wellness. Although now we've expanded to see men and couples as well. But at the time I started it, very in line with what you're doing in your podcast, is helping women thrive, which is why I call it Thrive. Because there's a lot of surviving and functioning, but not thriving. And so to understand all the complexity that goes into a woman's life and to help her to understand that so she can really live the life that she wants through all the phases and seasons of life. There was not a lot out there at the time. And I was frustrated by that. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to start it. So now I have a group practice that focuses on that. And at this point, we're all over the country, 40 plus states. And then with my practice, I focus very much on executives, CEOs, founders, and, been women that are really a lot of women in that midlife transition or curating the second half of their life and what they want. This is a topic that's very dear to my heart.
Oh, that's great. What are some of the key challenges? Because there's just, we talk about mental health, which is extremely important because your mindset leads with everything. It's just everything, pretty much. Yeah. But what are some of those key challenges in that mental health with what, especially men face this as well. My husband's very honest with me about that. So it's very important because men do, but they just don't verbalize it. But with, it can be the depression, it can be mood swings, it can be all sorts of things happen and physically. So what are some of the key challenges that you've seen because you saw the need? So what are some of those details?
Yeah. So, and you mean specifically in that, halftime. I love how you say that, the halftime. It's a great way to put it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot, and I'm glad you pointed out with men. Men have, by the way, just terrible mental health outcomes for the, older men, really bad, because they don't get help, and women do get help. And that tends to help over the course of their life. But really a lot of it is, shame, pathologizing. It's just me. And sometimes and I'll try to normalize this and say this to my clients. I'll say this to my team, to say this. It's like, it's not just you, and I'll have a, woman sit down and be like, oh my God, I'm the only one who goes through this. And then 1 hour later, oh my God, I'm the only one going through this. And then, oh my God, I'm the only one. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so it's that, and I think we're in such a kind of a strange place in our social awareness around mental health, where there's a lot of information on social media about diagnoses. There's a lot of we know a lot of words, but I think it gives us a lot of false confidence that maybe we understand things that we don't. And so there's a lot of labeling and misusing diagnoses, but not truly understanding. So I in some ways it helps with the stigma around mental health, but on the other hand, I think people are not diving in as deeply to their personal experiences. And no matter what someone is going through, it's a very personal, holistic thing. It's not just about their mental health. It's about all the things in their life that impact that. And like you said, everything starts with your mindset and your mental health, which is one of the reasons why I got into psychology in the first place. I'm like, I could fix all the things, but if we cannot help a person to see things differently, then we really can't effectively change their lives. So, yeah.
And there's a real emphasis on this, self-help and all of that. But some people can stay in that forever. They're going to stay forever in the roundabout, as I say, and not be willing to do the work. And it is work to come out of that and to change the language, to change the habits, to change all of that. And so we have this victim mentality in our society. And I'm sure you see a lot of that. And we'll talk about that a little bit, because unless someone decides to change and decides that they want to do the work, it's not going to happen. It's just not. And it's all the quotes in the world are not going to heal you. You have to do the work. So I'm sure you've encountered.
I mean, that's another thing around with what I was saying around the labels and the diagnoses. People are accepting it as a destiny. They're like, I have anxiety, and then I'm like, and so what are you doing with it? It's or I have trauma. Okay, well, trauma is an injury, not an illness. There's so much you can do to heal. Or they write off other people. She's a narcissist. Well, maybe she just disagreed with you. Or maybe she's, there's so much of that. But it doesn't, I think the reason people like the self-help is because it's not vulnerable. Because reading about it gives us that little taste that we're doing something, but we're not letting another person or people look into our inner world. And we all have massive blind spots. And also we're mammals. So we're pack animals. We're community-based. That's how we function. And we don't heal that well alone. And so, I think we think, well, I'll just get the information. But if knowing better helped us to do better, the internet would make us all geniuses, right? So we would all be living our best lives, right? So I think that was what we believed. I remember pre-internet exposure, we're like, oh, it's just a lack of information. That's not the issue anymore. So then we have to realize, you said it's the work. And, and usually there's something that motivates someone where it gets bad enough, and they're just like, I just can't anymore with this. I'm willing to do it. And then usually their response is, I can't believe I didn't do this sooner, because I've been carrying this, bag of emotional rocks my whole life. And, okay, I just needed to unpack it. And now I feel so much better. But it's scary.
It is scary. And either they come to that point or they just sort of give up and say, I'm always going to be this way.
Yeah.
So that's sad. And when you mention shame, it's kind of embarrassing if somebody calls you out on things, and you might just stay in that little area for a long time unless you can have those conversations, and at least have the conversations. It's not like it's you understand this is kind of normal. This is, this is, you got to break the pattern at some point. Well, so what are some of the suggestions besides getting the personal help and maybe having some of those conversations in thriving during this really tricky time? And I say it's halftime begins really, the internet says it begins at age 40. And I think it even might start, it depends on where you're at in your life, in your career, and because it really can start anytime you start facing some changes. Kids are getting older, all of those sort of things.
Oh yeah. And I'll say this to clients. I think it can be a really positive thing for women. We have a gift of, I will see clients, they will come in a lot of times right as they're thinking, I'm about to run out of my fertility years, but for them, that might be 35, so in their mind, and they're like, okay, I'm not married. I want to work on the stuff. I'm having patterns in relationship. I'm like, this is a gift, because I think men can go just full steam. Nothing's changed. Ignore what's happening in the mirror, not see the things until they get to a certain age. And then they're like, okay, I can't deny this anymore. Or they do, and that's sad. But they could have that with the women. We really have to face certain things are changing and they're outside of our control at such a younger age, which is a gift. So then it's really considering and gives us a chance to think, well, what do I want the rest of my life to be? I want to choose. I don't want to just have it happen to me and then feel like I'm a victim of my own circumstances. So trying to help women to really do work around what do you want your life to look like? And that means, it's like, have a conversation with 80-year-old you. What do you imagine her looking like? What has she done? What matters to her? What doesn't matter? And then, start working backward of like, okay, I need to start making, because you can become that person. Every day helps you to become, and we build our own lives and curate that. Like you said, of the more of a victim way of looking, this is what it is, which is one of the greatest, it's just the greatest blocks. Yeah, it really is.
It's a total hindrance to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and absolutely.
It's so great that you mentioned the 80-year-old you, because actually I have a resource of an 80-year-old woman that is far beyond, who's gone through some of the same sort of issues I was able to be honest with. There's huge value in that. If you find a mentor that is past some of these stages, that's a safe relationship. And that's very, very valuable. I am a big believer in a good counsel and all of that, but you don't need to stay in counseling forever. And I am sure you are right in that, because there's a lot of people that stay in there much too long, because it's like, that's their feel good. And now, okay, they're going to be okay now for a little bit more time. And now, okay, let me schedule something else. And they're not doing that sort of work. And so, and you talk about habits. So I usually propose, I'm a big believer in journaling and some of those other things. But what are some of those habits that you say, especially as a clinical psychologist, because you've done the study on the mind, you've done with personalities especially, and your experience goes really deep that way. So what do you suggest with habits?
I think the thing too with habits, to the shame or the people take on like a moral failing of my character, that I'm doing this thing that I don't want to do. Yeah. And if they can just remove all of that and look at it and understand their brain. I'm a big believer in educating my clients on understanding their brain, their nervous systems, their bodies, giving them just their operating instructions. So that really removes a lot of shame. And so I'll say, okay, a habit is just a well-worn path in your brain. And our brain wants to make things automatic because it's a time saver and it's trying to be an efficiency expert. And it takes a lot of, you can see it actually when they scan the brain. When you're doing a new activity, it takes a lot of effort. And that's the kind of exhaustion you feel when you start a new job or you do something new, until it starts to make these automatic. But then when those automatic things happen, then they feel almost out of our control. So, and if we have one that we don't like, there has to be a conscious effort to go in, see that as a well-worn path, see the points where maybe we could make different decisions to take another path. And this is where like meditation and mindfulness is so helpful, because it gives you a pause, between stimulus and response. And in that pause, we can be like, okay, this person did this. I normally respond like this. Take a breath. Is that going to serve me? And then using like also in advance visualizing, because our brain has a hard time telling the difference, or really can't tell the difference between what we visualize and what we actually experience. So you're helping to like make a new road. So you have a super highway to a bad place. And what you're saying is, I don't want to have that super highway of automatic thought. I'm going to build a new one, and I'm going to visualize myself doing something different every time. And then you start to do it. And then you think about like, how much time can I spend on this new path? Every time I do that, I'm making it the path, and the other one is becoming less and less used. And, trauma introduces a whole other thing to it, because that's a much more quick path. So there's work that we need to do if there's trauma based into it, and that's habits plus traumatic experiences. And that's, but there's really good techniques. And that's where like having someone who's an expert in trauma help you with it. That's the time where you might need help versus, I can do this with just accountability and friends.
Right. Yeah. That's an excellent point, because some people have gone through that trauma. And actually I have for my well-being, as I go into a gal to do a like deep tissue massage, but she's going into trauma, sort of being able to use, the massage and all of that with trauma victims. But she said big time, or first responders, all of those, they need that sort of, it's not always that they have PTSD. They just need, sort of some of that release of, the muscles and the toxicity in the body. So but that's part of that. So with all of that, but trauma is a big deal. And those habits, it's interesting too, when you mentioned the repetition, because that's an entertainment principle too, of visualizing yourself walking out on a stage, visualizing all of that. Or visualizing yourself performing a piece. That's been part of actually training that I had growing up. And I didn't realize how much that applies to other areas of your life as well. So that's very, very valuable. Good. Change the mindset and your thinking habits. Very, very valuable. So yeah, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, I love, as I've been, because of what the work I do is really like not been done that much, right? Of how I'm trying to bring together and see a different higher level of functioning and thriving in my clients. I'll pull from different areas, but sports psychology is one of them. So it's the same. It's that and that visualizing and seeing it over and over in your mind, and in the meditation, and how many like athletes and performers, it's so much of it's in the mind. And so helping people that are in business, I use a lot of things from sports psychology, performance psychology with people that are in business, because it's the same principles, but it's not, we can get around performance or arts or around sports a lot more honest than maybe we can around business, because people don't necessarily want to share it while they're going through it. They'll write an autobiography after retirement, and they don't have to worry about their investors. But, so there's this sense of, I'm the only one doing it, but I want to give people tools like that to help them. It's nervous system management. It's mind management. And if you can do that, like, you've won, because it's really just the ability to do it over and over, be willing to fall down, get back up. And there's so much of that we can learn.
And I love it that you brought into sports too. I'm married to a former professional athlete. It's very much mindset, very much. And talk about mindset when you start getting older and your body doesn't do what it used to do. Oh my goodness. But there's so much to that. Our minds really govern so much of, our life and our well-being. So that's a great point that you brought up. I love that. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about hormones as well, because it's so funny. I have two younger sisters, and for years I didn't say they were younger. I said, "Oh no, but now I will take that credit that I'm the older bossy sister." But they, they were going, all this hormones and all of these things, because they were starting to go through their midlife and and I said, I didn't even feel anything. I didn't even know I was in that. But sometimes you don't really even know that you're in that stage until all of a sudden you're going, I don't feel the same way. I don't do all of these things. My emotions aren't the same. It's like, who is this guy I married? All of those things start happening in that time of life. And you feel like maybe you're going different directions but you have to realize that there's hormones involved, especially with women, I think. But men go through it too, because we've always joked about the midlife, car or midlife, whatever. But they go through a lot of things mentally too, because their image is different. They're carrying their weight different, a lot of things. So why don't you comment on that, on the hormones, because that's another area of your expertise.
Yeah. So like what you said with men, it's they do have the hormonal shifts, but it's a subtle shift that really starts from like 25 on. And it's like this, as opposed to women's like the roller coaster.
Yes, of course.
And so, it's more noticeable for us, but they have it so they can miss it. And then all of a sudden be like, what's going on? Like you said, the weight changes and the changes in testosterone, and there's shifts. Some of it's positive, some of it, they may not see as positive. And there's, there's a lot of high profile people that are now talking about the hormone, replacement therapies and things that they do for men and women.
Right.
But for women, I think the first thing, and you did kind of allude to this, of it starts earlier than people realize. And so that's the thing. And perimenopause is really the biggest roller coaster. And because mental health symptoms tend to be some of the first ones that appear and then get misdiagnosed or not understood, that's why it's so important for psychologists, therapists to actually recognize it. And we're not trained. Like I had to really go out and pursue it even outside of the world of psychology, because I couldn't find good training in psychology. So I had to look into really a lot of other areas and dig into it. And a lot of OBGYNs are not trained in it. And I've talked to OBGYNs that specialize in it, and they're like, we got nothing. We got like a class. And that's so sad, because it's just not considered, but I think that goes together with, there's a lot of stuff that's overlooked for women. But it does start as early as late 30s for some people, because it can be 10 years of perimenopause and then the average age of menopause, which this, I'm probably saying something you already know, but it's a year without menstruation. And then that marks menopause. So, that average being 51. But if you look at that and you go back 10 years, this can start happening in your 40s.
Right.
So,
I agree.
Yeah. And then what's also such an interesting and complicated thing is that a lot of women are they're having their baby, in the middle, or they're seeking. Yeah. So they're like, wait, I have a baby and I'm starting to go through perimenopause. What's happening? I'm like, well, it's complicated. It doesn't always line up in the way that we think. So then that can have them miss it, because I think we have this mindset, this weird shadowy view of what menopause is, and we're thinking Golden Girls and maybe like a perm, and we're just not, we're just not. And then we'll say, so and so is this age, and they'll be like, what? We're so it's really about exploring that, so that we're not in denial or punishing ourselves with beliefs that are inaccurate. But the hormones start really shifting, and at such a young age. And so it's, getting assessed. Worst case scenario, you get a baseline. If they say your hormones are good, it's great to have a baseline, so that then when you go in and get, because a lot of times we don't get those measured until we're doing it with intention. It's not part of, a normal checkup. And then thinking the symptoms that might be related to it, like the mood swings, waking up in the middle of the night. Part of it is also around with sex that can creep in.
Right.
It might not mean that you don't want to have sex. It just means that you forget to think about it, because it's your test. So your test, so you'll have a responsive, but you're like, I forgot about that. As opposed to, and you're also a lot of times busy raising kids, having your career. There's other reasons to forget about it. But when we're younger, the testosterone goes together with the ovulation. We get a little peak, and we become sex seeking. When that starts to mellow, we kind of forget about it because we're busy with other things. Doesn't mean that we're not going to enjoy it. Doesn't mean that it's not going to be something that is still enjoyable and responsive to. So, but that's something that's really important for partners to understand, but it doesn't mean that you don't love them or you're not thinking about it purposely. It just means that you might need a cue. You might need something to put you in that place. And so maybe they need to be a little more, initiating, or maybe there needs to be more of a warm-up period for that. So
exactly, because the body's responding a little bit different too. You're because it's different. So I won't go into all those details, but the body is a little bit different. So the comfort, all of that stuff. So that's really important, and to be honest with that and say there are solutions. People have gone through this for how many years? So and how, again, I'm going to go back to this, your 80-year-old self. When you look back, what would you like your life really? What consistency would you like for your life? Where do you want to be? You want to be, completely unhappy and lonely at that point? Or do you want to have, been able to manage these things, at least gotten to help to manage your thing, everything through there, and grow as a person, really to be not always just blaming everything else for stuff that's going wrong, but to be able to say, I can grow through this and I can be an actual happy person. And not shutting everything else, because things come in our life to help us grow. And
100%.
That's, and it's not always comfortable, is it? So, man, oh man, but it's like an immune system. If we knew, going back to our recent shutdowns, but we knew we had already developed immunity because we had the COVID, but we knew we had already developed that immunity. So if you shut everything down in your body, you can't develop the immunity. If you shut everything down on your personal growth, you can't develop growth. If you shut down some of the confrontation or conversations, you can't grow through that. It's the same principle. There are life principles all around us that happen. So great. And I'm sure you can comment even more on that.
No, I love that. That's a wisdom bomb right there. Like, that's so true. Also, the word that you're saying, like, I'll point this out because this is a real mindset change. We are growing. We're not just aging, right? And that bothers me so much that 18, all of a sudden we're aging. No, we're growing. And actually, you can look at a lot of dysfunction and personality disorders from the perspective of someone who stopped growing.
Oh, wow.
And, our growth is, but you're right, you have to lean into the hard things. Those are a stimulus in us to grow us. And I think when we either say, I have no control over it, or we try to shrink our world so that we have the illusion that we do have control. And I think things that come up around, or denial, we'll just be in denial, or silence, or we won't use it as an opportunity. And a lot of times when people do struggle with, changes in sexuality or changes in their sex life, or that, it's because they already have a history of being silent with their partner, or they have their own shame and they don't want to talk about it. Or I really push back when people say this, and I hear this at all ages. Well, sex just dies off as we get older. I'm like, no, it does not. If you cultivate it, anything that you don't give energy to or put effort into will naturally atrophy. And so why do we think we can just, coast on initial attraction for the rest of our lives? You have to cultivate a healthy sex life. And that means it also is intimacy. It's also being friends with your partner. It's setting up opportunities and prioritizing it. And the older we get, you've probably seen those charts where it shows like the time you spend with your kids is really high when they're young. The time you spend with your partner is everything at the end of your life. That's your person.
That is
so. It. Yeah. So it's, do we want that when we finally have time to have like good sex, where kids are going to walk in? Do we want that at the time where we just decided not to? Because we believe that, which is actually research shows is not true. A lot of older adults, like even up into their 80s, are having sex. So I think that's just something people tell themselves because they're avoiding it and they don't want to work on it and they're ashamed, or they just don't want to prioritize it, which is really a loss.
I'm really glad you brought that up. because it's, I mean, all you have to look at, and you never know what's totally true, but, you look at someone, we just lost her, was Suzanne Summers, but she always flouted that.
Yeah.
Just with this great relationship. They had, wonderful time together. And, but that's a real encouragement, because they were definitely, growing older. But it really should, and that's a mindset, and with no shame, and say, now what's going to help us. And I tell you what, my husband and I have been married like 40, how many years? I lose tracks. I think 44 now. It's been a long time. But our friendship has grown deeper. And it was. I love that you brought out, it's almost like Maslow's,
hierarchy.
The hierarchy is like, at first you're married, but you got those kids, and it is so busy. You hardly, you just want, when the husband is around, all you want him to do is take over with kids, and then you can get on to your work and whatever. So how are you developing that relationship until you are older? You want to be able to put the seeds in there to grow together. So and friends as well. Yeah, and that's important. Yeah.
Well, and I think it really becomes, like you said, when your kids are young, it's triage, it's crisis mode, it's very logistical. And I think that what can happen is that not only our relationship, but also our personal development, doing things we love, whether it be our career or something else. And of course, your kids are going to want everything, because they do, especially when they're younger, all your time. But that it's our job as a parent to think of long-term what's good for them and short-term. And so I've suggested to some of my clients where it's like, they'll have kids that are in their 20s, but they're like wanting their mom to be always available. And they're like, well, I really wanted to do this thing, but then I feel bad. And I'm like, okay, they're old enough for you to have a conversation with them. And this, like, some of these clients, they're like, I'm not happy with how my mom is living her life. She's just hovering, waiting for anything to do with me. Right. And I feel guilty because she doesn't have a life that's full. And I said, well, why don't you say to your kids, look, you see how grandma is, and you feel bad for her. That would be what would happen to me if I don't take time right now. And so this is for your future too.
Right.
And they've been very a lot of times the kids are responsive. They're like, oh, I get it. Or, your kid may not want to be with the babysitter while you go out to date night.
Right.
But I've never, ever heard a client say to me, and this is the nice thing about a therapist, you really get to find out what people talk about in therapy and what really traumatized them and what doesn't. Yes. No one is traumatized by their parents' date night.
That's great.
Like, what a great example. I love that my parents are friends. I want a marriage like that. That's the kind of stuff that they say. They don't say, oh man, I had to eat pizza and watch TV on a Friday night. Well, that doesn't make it to therapy.
That would be fun.
So part of it is, again, not just pushing through the discomfort of your child asking for something in the now, and learning how to have boundaries, because it serves them and you and your partner.
Right. I love it that we're talking about those times of life too, because there's a lot of women that are having kids a little bit older. And I have two daughters-in-laws that, recent daughters-in-laws, one that just had they had their first child, but they are a little bit older. And so they're going to be facing some of this, kind of quick, and their kids are still young, but you've got to realize some of these times of life that your body may be already changing, and, how are you going to deal with those emotions that come with that? Because they do. I mean, the emotions, and I just sort of stuffed them for a while because I'm, a little bit quieter on sharing anything. And, you just kind of stuff them until you realize, and that's why I have journaled so much. I end up throwing those pages away, but it's important to do that. And because I don't feel it's healthy for me to just, just talk to everybody, but there are trusted people you can, which is really important. That's why your role is extremely important for men and women. And I love it that you're, kind of nationwide, that you're in 40 states is wonderful. So, well, when you're working with those long-term relationships, this was one of the questions that I wanted to cover, or the marriages. What are some of the challenges? We've talked about the sex challenge, the communication challenge, but what are some of those tips that you can give? I mean, this is not a marriage seminar here, but a lot of, I see more splits happen at the halftime of life than any other time. The statistic is huge because you all of a sudden you've gone these different ways, and the cycle's just going to repeat itself. It just is. That's exactly what happens unless you kind of cover, unless there's real abuse in the marriage, or you don't want physical, whatever. So what can you say? How do you open up those communication doors? How do you open up some of that with, because I'm sure you're not marriage and family, but boy, you probably approach that.
Oh, yeah. It comes up quite a bit. I mean, our relationships are our greatest joy, and they're also our greatest source of pain. That's just our human condition. I mean, as with everything, prevention is the best, right? So again, and so I think, again, curating, thinking about also along with that, I want my 80-year-old self to be, what do I want my marriage to look like when I'm in my, 70s, when I'm in my 80s, and then thinking, how do I get there, right? So, and how do you prioritize, and having open communication with your partner and talking about what you prioritize and what you both care about. The lack of communication in relationships is so shocking. And it really is the main cause of pain, and what is such a heartbreak to me. I mean, like you said, when someone is really, truly on a different page, or there's abuse, or there's something that's really, you're like, that's a mercy kill for that relationship to be over. And usually the kids are happy and everybody's happy, and then people just need to go. Something happened, maybe they got together young, and the divorce rate for like people get married before 25 is much higher, by the way, than people after that. The 50% statistic is not accurate. If you get married after 25, it's much lower. It's a much lower divorce rate. So it's better, but if it's before 25, it's higher. So, because you change, your brain's not, now we know our brain's not finished developing until we're, so anyway, I think it's like, when I see couples where you just know each of them wants the same thing, but they can't communicate to each other to say it, because like, well, if I said that, then maybe they would reject me. And then maybe, so I encourage clients to take the vulnerability risk and to say it, especially if it's like, if your fear is that something's going to happen in your relationship, you're going to lose the person. If you don't, that's going to happen. And you really you're not, so what we were talking about earlier, there's what you can control and what you can't. And a lot of healthy living is knowing the two. And what you can control is asking for what you need. And there's a lot of fear around that. And when you don't do that, then you criticize. And then you never did that. Well, but if you never asked the person or told them that it mattered to you, then how did they know what to prioritize? So a lot of it is that communication. Now, that being said, sometimes during the fury and the flurry of kids and all of that stuff, then you're right. Like, there's a lot of divorces that happen right at the empty nester stage, particularly because then these people are looking at each other and be like, I am a stranger to you, or I want something so much different than where you are. And they've just grown apart. And sometimes that gap is so wide. So I think that's a great time. And again, as individual therapies become less stigmatized, marriage therapy is no longer considered like the last stop before divorce. Especially during COVID. There's a lot of people who got divorced in COVID, and there's a lot of people who made their marriages so much better because they were together all the time. And so now there's a real more of a thrive approach to marriage. So then it's like, look, you get this time together now, but you have to invest in it, and you got to talk about the things you haven't talked about, and you got to really be honest, and then you got to learn how to like reconnect. You got to focus on things like talk, play, sex. It's and the statistics show that like that is actually when marriage happiness is the highest. It's even higher than the honeymoon phase because it's all the stupid things you get in fights over. Where you realize after a while, like you said, they all run on repeat. And then all of a sudden you could just say to your partner, okay, this is the time where you say this, and then I say this, and you say this and this. And then we like don't talk for 2 days. Can we just not do that and get to the part where we hug and make up? I know that you don't want to do that, and I don't want to do that. So who has energy for this? And so, if you've talked through those, there's not that many things to fight over at that point. And then you can have fun. And so it's really, and it's trying to find that friendship. And really enjoying it.
And not just blaming each other on, hurling, as I say, the term for that. So that's a great, and to start early. And if it does start early, that's a gift. Then it's not going to happen just at that crucial point. All of a sudden you wake up and the kids are grown. at least you've done some of the work, and because it is work, those conversations, misunderstandings. And, I've got to be careful how I communicate. My husband, you always think they're just such a tough guy. He's got a tender heart. And, there's just, things that how we say it and how we approach topics to still be very honest. But how we approach topics are really, really important in communication. There's so many resources, good resources, and to just find some of those, read those reviews, talk to people that have gone through maybe some of those things. So,
And also you make the good point too with your husband. That's something I think women, and some of this is just societal misconceptions. There's this, oh, well, he doesn't care. Or he doesn't want to do that thing, or he takes me for granted, or he doesn't really, but really, men there, especially in a long-term partnership, they are so their well-being is so connected to their partner and their partner being happy with them. And a lot of times we assume that they know what we want, but they don't. But if we ask, because I think what can happen is we're afraid to ask because that's vulnerable, and say, this really matters to me. And assume that they want to do the thing. That they want to, if it matters to you, that they actually do want to make you happy, because they do most of the time, And so, and then that totally disrupts that criticism cycle, because what a lot of times women won't ask, because they'll think, well, men always do this. No.
Yes.
That's not true. Like sometimes men are, they just, and then, but even the ones that are like that, they will change if they are asked to. And the majority of divorces are put through by women. And
I agree.
But a lot of times it's because at least give them the chance to be their best self, instead of assuming that they can't or they won't. And there's a lot of women get a lot of training about how to do relationships, how to do family, how to do household stuff, where sometimes I'll ask a client, does your husband actually know how to do that thing? They'll be like, he never does it. I'm like, but what if he doesn't know how? Was he actually taught how to do that thing? And then they're like, oh, but he doesn't want to look stupid, like he doesn't know, or she's already done it. So ask him, and then teach him, and then assume that he's a grown-up who wants to do it and will do it. And then say thank you and appreciate all the things that he does. That's another thing. Partners take for granted all the things the other person does. When you tend to divide up different things in life, and then because we're doing ours and theirs just gets done. If they're doing it well, we just take it for granted until it's no longer.
Yes.
And so, but it's so easy to blame a partner, but a good therapist won't let you.
I'm so glad. Well, you mentioned a couple things, and then we probably need to start landing the ship here. But when you mentioned it, because boy, we really got on relationships, but it's such an important part of life, of this period of life. But our respect and gratefulness for each other, thankfulness for each other. That is one of the biggest things, because there are so many expectations. I remember even the beginning of my marriage, and my husband's just saying, you expect me to do all of these things, and you're good. My dad was very handy. Well, I learned my husband is not. So, but I was expecting him just, can you just fix it? Well, I'm the one that does a lot of, because we've learned now, okay, who's better at what? And I don't like to be in the area that he's just so good in, the financial area and all that. He's a whiz. I mean, his brain works entirely different than mine. So you understand, then I start adding on with that respect and appreciation for each other. A lot can be solved if people feel appreciated, they feel respected, especially men. If they feel respected, they feel, and having sons, it's not good if they don't feel, if they feel disrespected, it really affects them. They back off. Yeah, they really back off.
Yeah, and there's so Karen Horney, she was a psychoanalyst she was a student of Freud, but then she came out very early, female psychologist or psychiatrist, psychotherapist. And she said, I don't believe in penis envy, I believe in womb envy. And it's like, as women, we really have a lot of purpose. We can just say, well, I had kids and I have made my mark, and that is what that is. And we have so much investment time we have to put into it. But men are like, what do you need me for? What do you want me for?
Yeah.
And so, and they, and that doesn't mean, some people will come and say, oh, well, that's why the man has to make all the money. You're emasculating him. It's like, no, that isn't true. And if you've met a woman, that there's all these other things that men can be and do, and you really want a partner.
Right.
But they want to know, like, do you appreciate what I'm doing?
Yes.
And so some of that respect is like, am I valuable to this thing we got going here? Like, am I bringing something? And we tend to, the communication styles are different. Like, men and women are socialized to communicate differently. Like you said, like honesty with respect goes a lot further. And we can say things sometimes to men that we would never say to a girlfriend because she would be crushed, or we would never want to be said. But if it's put together with respect and like, I know you can do this thing. I know you want to do this thing. Why aren't you doing the thing? Like, that's so much more honest. If you said that to a woman, she's like, like it's a hard because we're so much more like, we just communicate differently, but they want to know that you're for them. And that, and then I think that way of being, if that comes from respect, if we treat them like little children who can't do anything, that's the opposite of respect.
Exactly.
And we truly don't respect them if we don't believe they can do things like pick up their socks. Like, seriously, like, people can grow and learn how to do stuff,
And I've learned another one of my favorite phrases, major on the majors,
Yes.
That's been the beginning of our marriage. There's socks still left. And you know what? It is not that when we have company, they're up. Otherwise, I'm not going to make a big deal. Otherwise, I'm always, I don't need to do that. He doesn't need, and I don't want him doing that to me, No.
Well, and I think communicating to somebody, like sitting down and really talking about, like, if there's something that really matters to you and it doesn't matter to them, and then, every time they do it, it's like they bought you flowers. Like, they're not doing it for themselves, but they may not be like, I don't get it. It's not a big deal. So then they don't do the thing. But then we have things like that to them, it's such a big deal. So I think it's talking about, like, when this happens, when this happens, I feel appreciated. When you do this, I know you're thinking of me, and we hear a lot about the love languages, but like getting behind what is going on with the love languages, right? So acts of service, does it mean you're helping me? You're not taking me for granted.
Yes.
Is of words of affirmation. You're appreciating me. I need to feel gratitude for me, and there's so many different ways we can do that, but we have to take ownership to love our partner in a way that they can actually hear, and not just love them the way we want to be loved. And, and that requires us to actually get to know them, which is the ultimate way to love someone, to really get to know them.
Such great advice. Well, we need to land the plane here. We're going to go
on and on. It's such a great topic.
This is fascinating. But what is one word of advice that you would, kind of leave everyone that they can apply right now? And then I want you to verbalize, even though in the show notes, and a lot of times I have articles that come out with these, and I have notes everywhere, so you can find you and all of that. But I want you to tell everyone where to reach you, and if you have any sort of resources that people can click in. And but what's one thing that you can leave our audiences with, and how do we get a hold of Dr. Ruan? So
I would say, and this is just don't foreclose on your identity and your future. Don't assume that, what is. Don't assume that you don't have choices and control over things. It might be work, but you can really do so much to make your life what you want it to be. And so I think being open is the first step, and then being willing to do the work. So we're not victimized by our own lives. And, and that's a good thing for any time in life. But I definitely think, at the halftime where we have a lot of control over our destiny. And so we get to make it, so,
Definitely.
And for finding me, our website is www.mythrivepsychology.com. So if you want to work with me or anyone on the team, you can go ahead and schedule a consult there. I love doing social media. I love making like little videos and just, I don't know, like little wisdom tips usually, right? Or a little bit more in depth.
Perfect.
Like I said, sometimes social media just skims the surface, but I actually want to give some things that help people to grow and change and know themselves better. So on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of them, and YouTube. Yeah. So if somebody wants to maybe not go into therapy, but they want to like learn more about themselves and get some good wisdom, they can go any of those places.
Oh, well, thank you. I've loved our guests that are so generous too with resources. So I encourage everyone to do that. And I thank all of you that are still listening and that have hung in with us with this really pretty interesting conversation. Really kind of wind in and out. But it's been great to have you here. Thank you so much for your time, your valuable time, Charlene. And I encourage everyone to get our newsletters and all of our recent, I don't spam people. I put out an article once a week, but then I also announce all of our podcasts. So I want to make sure everybody doesn't miss a single episode. We have a lot of interesting ones, including this one. And so make sure you're clicked in on that goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter, but you'll get all of those links in the show notes as well. And that you can connect with me anywhere and also with you. Thank you so much for being a wonderful guest and having a wonderful conversation with us today.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you all for joining us. And I will look forward to being with you again next time. So bye-bye for now. Thank you for joining us. It is because of our wonderful listeners like you that we keep going strong week after week. We'd love it if you'd share and follow us to not miss a single show and even write a review. You can also find all of our articles, products, and links at womenathalftime.com.